The Treasures of Ol' Emmer Joe, a fairy tale, written and read for you by MJTR. Many years ago, in a village that has long since disappeared, there lived a woman in a mansion of gold and silver. For as long as anyone in the village around her could remember, she was called Ol' Emmer Joe, though anyone who was totally sure why had passed away many, many years ago. Emmer Joe was an ancient figure who commanded great respect thanks to her wealth, though its source, too, had been lost to the ages. It was said that long ago, Emmer Joe spent many pieces of gold keeping up with the townsfolk. She drank heartily, danced wonderfully, and was a chatty socialite. She bought expensive wine and hired only the finest musicians to play in her home and for the townsfolk, and they returned her gifts with their company. It was a mutually beneficial arrangement. But with time, even though it seemed inexorable, Emmer Joe began to slow. Her wrinkles and age spots seemed to catch up with her overnight. Her deep, dark hair began to grow white. And, though she had the wealth and the will to bathe constantly, sometimes there was no overcoming that smell that follows around the elderly. And so in time, the people in town stopped coming to her parties, and stopped inviting her to theirs. And this was very, very sad. As the many years passed, Emmer Joe's memory too was affected, until she too no longer remembered where her fortune had come from. In those times, the only company she usually saw was her grandson. Ol' Emmer Joe's grandson always came around the house to visit her. When she was too tired to cook for him, he would prepare a meal for the both of them, even if he wasn't always very good at it. Ol' Emmer Joe always asked him if he was well and if there was anything he needed. Her grandson usually came up with some excuse to take his grandmother's gold, but that was not why he came to her home. One day, he said to her, "Grandmother, you know I don't like to ask things of you, but there's a favor I must ask for." "Nonsense, child," Emmer Joe laughed as she spoke. "Shall I buy you a new stallion? A vessel worthy to carry you across the seas?" "No, grandmother. I would like those things, of course, but I don't need them." Go on then, Emmer Joe said. "What can Nana give to you?" "What I'd like most is to study the arts at the university." There was a short pause between them before Emmer Joe burst out laughing. "Ah, ha, 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 ha. Do they teach magic at the schools now?" "Not magic studies, Nana," her grandson said. "Grammar and sciences, things that could get me a real job." "What does my grandbaby need a real job for?" Emmer Joe smiled. "I'll always be here to take care of you." No, it's not for me, it's the Smithy's daughter. You know we've loved one another for years, but her father isn't won by old money. He won't believe I can take care of her without a real job to support myself." Though she had closed her eyes and almost looked to be sleeping, Ol' Emmer Joe slowly nodded. "What will it cost?" Her grandson named his price for the years of tuition required. It was much more than he usually discussed with her, but old Emmer Joe knew it was important, so she handed him the gold without any further questions. The nearest university was many miles from her mansion, even on horseback, so Emmer Joe said a sad goodbye to her grandson, who swore he would return as soon as he could. Several months after Emmer Joe's grandson had departed for the university, a miller named Mr. Hayworth found his old horse didn't have the strength to keep carrying him to and from the market to sell his goods. Mr. Hayworth grew grave with concern, as he had a wife and 4 children at home to care for. He could not afford to buy a new horse, and couldn't afford to lose the one he had. But after many hours of stressful deliberation, he came upon an idea. Mr. Hayworth journeyed through the forest and past an old blackened shack to turn up on Ol' Emmer Joe's doorstep. He knocked on the door and mentally prepared his plea. When Ol' Emmer Joe answered the door, a wide grin came across her half-toothless mouth. "My boy,
Are you finished with your studies so quickly?
Mr. Hayworth was put off for a moment, and opened his mouth to tell the elder he was not her grandson, but didn't get the chance.
Come in, won't you, boy? I'll make those scones you love so much.
Actually, Nana, I don't think I have the time. Mr. Hayworth did not like the thought of deceiving the old woman, but he hadn't done anything to do so. In her fog, she had come to her own conclusion.
I'm terribly sorry, but I was on my way back to school when a highwayman took my horse. Goodness me, Emmer Joe said. Of course. Let me fetch you some gold. You will go back to school upon a stallion.
Emmer Joe retrieved the funds and gave a great bag of gold to a stunned Mr. Hayworth.
Thank you, Nana, he said. This will be more than enough. Get yourself something to eat while you're there, then, you skinny child, Emmer Joe said. Go on now, but don't be gone long. Promise you'll stay for tea next time?
Yes, Mr. Hayworth said. I promise. In town, the local horse trader looked upon Mr. Hayworth's funds with the utmost suspicion. Thought I heard it had been a poor season, said the horse trader. Where'd all this come from now?
It was a gift, Mr. Hayworth said. It was given freely by a kindly old woman.
What did you do? Cut her purse? The trader asked. I don't want any stolen gold around here. St. Peter will know about it.
It isn't stolen, Mr. Hayworth said. I swear it.
The stern old horse trader crossed his arms. Tell me where it came from, then, or you can keep it and barter elsewhere for a cow to ride on. And so, with reluctance, Mr. Hayworth told the horse trader the story of his request to Emmer Joe. Perhaps he had fibbed, but only just a little, and that fib allowed the old spinster to see her grandson again. If you thought about it, Mr. Hayworth had done a very nice thing for the old woman. After much discussion and thought, the horse trader sold Mr. Hayworth one of his stallions. It all seemed wrong to the horse trader, but he wanted the gold, even if he had resisted. That night when he came home with a new dress for his daughter, and his wife asked him where he had found the coin, he retold Mr. Hayworth's story, and when the little girl was in school the next day, she told it again, and the children who heard her told it again as soon as they came home to their parents. In the midst of this, Mr. Cook, a baker of breads and cakes, found a terrible leak in the roof of his shop. The years of poor jobs done to his roof meant the whole structure had to be reshingled, something he didn't have the gold for. And, as for a solution to a problem, he had heard his son telling his friends about how eager the old woman outside of town had become to give away her money. Mr. Cook did not stop to think on the matter even half as long as Mr. Hayworth had, and he soon made his journey past the forest and the old shack toward Emmer Joe's house. Though it had been mere days since Hayworth had knocked upon her door, it may as well have been years since Emmer Joe had seen her beloved grandson.
My sweet boy, I have just put stew on. Come in, let us eat together.
If only I could, grandmother, Mr. Cook said. But the new term has just begun, and I need many new books if I am to keep up.
Oh, you silly boy, you didn't need to space out your requests.
Emmer Joe retrieved more gold and handed it over. Her only question was,
Are you sure you can't stay a little longer?
Sorry, grandmother, so much work to do. The next time.
Yes, she smiled her half-toothed smile. Next time.
With a little more time, it became the consensus that Emmer Joe was doing just fine with all the small, necessary requests that she was getting. She could surely handle a few more now and again, and perhaps in a few circumstances it wasn't totally necessary to assume the identity of her grandson. A priest from the church appeared for the second time in 1 month, but Emmer Joe had forgotten that she'd already given to the church that month. And, after all, how could she turn away a man who only sought to feed the children? That they were his own children, and that he was looking to feed them with prime meats, tossed in exotic spices, that detail was not strictly necessary for her to know. A landlord began to appear on the first of each month to accept payment for old Emmer Joe's mansion. Though she could swear she had paid it off so long ago, She wasn't one to argue. After all, the landlord probably had a wife to dress in the finest furs, and there was plenty of gold to go around for that. Carpet traders who claimed to come from faraway lands sold Emmer Joe an entire house worth of carpet and offered to take all of her furniture out from her home so that the carpet could be applied, and at no extra cost to her. It sounded like too good of a deal to pass up, so old Emmer Joe didn't. The carpet sellers, it turns out, were only from as far away as the village itself, and they stored all of Emmer Joe's furniture in their own houses for safekeeping. She never did see the new carpet, but that was all right. She soon forgot she had purchased it at all. One day, after answering so many knocks at the door, Emmer Joe did so and saw her landlord once again.
"Oh, good morning to you,"
Emmer Joe said. "Hello," said the landlord. "Do you have this month's mortgage?"
"Oh, dear me."
Emmer Joe looked back into her nearly empty house and recalled the many coins she'd given away in the past weeks.
Well, I fear I may not."
The landlord breathed a deep sigh.
"Surely we can work something out,"
Emmer Joe said.
"I've never even been late on a payment, have I?"
"It saddens me that your memory has become so clustered," said the landlord. "This was your last warning."
"Oh, goodness!"
A tear welled up in old Emmer Joe's eyes.
"Oh, what has become of me? When did I become so forgetful?"
"It's a beautiful house, Miss Emmer Joe," said the landlord. "I'm sure you understand it doesn't come cheap." Old Emmer Joe nodded as she wept.
"But whatever shall I do? I'm an old woman. Where could I possibly go?"
The landlord was moved with something like pity. "I must claim this house now, but you may continue to live in the shack at the bottom of the hill." Emmer Joe was overcome with her gratefulness and thanked him again and again as he moved his own family into the house he had claimed. Little old Emmer Joe made the journey down the hill, a simple task for a young woman, but far harder for her. But she was resilient, and eventually made it inside. As old Emmer Joe stepped into the damp, cold little shack, she couldn't shake some familiarity of the place. She had barely remembered the structure had been there when she was back inside of her mansion, but now she couldn't shake this feeling of remembrance. On a small table in the center of the shack, there sat a bottle of a glowing green substance. Old Emmer Joe hobbled up to the bottle and squinted at a note left right underneath. It read, "Dear Emmer Joe, if you should need to read this, it's probably time to take a sip from the bottle. Hope the house is well. Hope you're feeling good. Hope our sweet boy is a success. Sincerely, Emmer Joe." Old Emmer Joe had no memory of the note or the green vial, and perhaps another day she would have questioned it further, but she felt in that moment that she could trust herself. Old Emmer Joe drank down the contents of the bottle and was struck by how strange the flavor was. It seemed so sweet, yet so salty, so gamey and so fishy. It tasted like lobster and durian and goose and starfruit all at the same time, but how did Emmer Joe know what any of those things tasted like? She'd never eaten any of those things. But slowly, it returned to her. She had eaten lobster before, and durian, and goose, and starfruit too, along with many other things in her younger days. As she smacked her lips, she began, almost without thinking about it, to hum a tune she did not know. Except she quickly realized that she did know the tune. It was a lively jig from when she was a young woman. How long ago had that been? 40, maybe 50 years before? And then, as old Emmer Joe whistled her little tune, she remembered. She had first heard the song almost 300 years before. But how could that be? She couldn't possibly be that old, could she? and, as if a glass that hit the floor had undone its own destruction, the countless little pieces of old Emmer Joe's memory returned to her. Before she was old Emmer Joe, she was known throughout the villages and the countryside as Emerantine Josephine, and she was a witch, and not a mean trickster witch, a kind and helpful witch. Emerantine Josephine had brewed all sorts of wonderful concoctions for folks in villages all around her in that tiny little shack. She brewed potions that relieved illness, supplements that made it easier for mothers and fathers to bear children, and all kinds of magical treats for the little ones. She was beloved by all who came to her door, and made a well-earned fortune for the goodness she produced. The townspeople were kind to her back. She was invited to all of their sumptuous banquets and balls. Dozens of men came to woo her before she finally picked one who helped her raise her children, and sadly aged and passed away much faster than she did. So many memories, both happy and bittersweet, filled her mind. For a moment, old Emmer Joe nearly wept. But as the memories from that far-flung past returned to her, other memories became clearer as well, like a countertop, freshly swept of dust. The man who had come to repossess her house wasn't the same man who had come a few days before him, and that one wasn't the same who came before him. In fact, she could remember paying off her mansion over 100 years ago. And as she remembered all the parties she'd once attended, she also remembered the distinct time the invites had stopped coming. It was around the first time she'd begun to wrinkle and her voice stopped sounding so steady. Is that why they had stopped inviting her to dance and eat with them? Because she had grown old and unsteady and begun to carry that aging smell? With the memories came a newfound strength. Emmer Joe stood up straight for the first time in many, many years. Perhaps that rejection was no crime. She'd become much too tired to dance and feast like she had in her younger days. But no one had offered to cook a meal for her, or play music in her home, or care for her in her advanced age. It was on this same train of thought she remembered the many, many times her grandson had come and pled with her for gold. And it was then she realized that none of those beggars had even been her grandson. Old Emmer Joe cried hot, bitter tears. She didn't even need all the gold she'd given away, and she didn't need a big house that she could barely walk through anymore. But all of the people of the town had taken from her and given nothing in return, least of all a care for her well-being. As the tears subsided, anger took their place. Old Emmer Joe rose one of her bony arms, and a great fire lit beneath her cauldron. Magic, by itself, is never a force for good or for evil. Magic only causes things to happen, and it is in choosing what those things are that happen that witches do their work. A skilled witch can, for instance, bring a clean, crisp rain upon land struck with drought, and they were just as capable of flooding a region already plagued with heavy storms. It was on the night that old Emmer Joe regained her memories that she brought a great, terrible storm down upon the nearby village. The lightning bolt severed the restraints that held all the wonderful ponies Mr. Hayworth and others had purchased with her gold, and the thunder made them scurry off in fear. Soon after the rain came hail that smashed through the roof of Mr. Cook's bakery and soon ruined his kitchen. In the home of every priest who fed on exotic meats and spices, there laid tiny, dormant, parasitic eggs in their spice mixtures, who awoke and soon infested their foodstuffs. Armies upon armies of termites came out from the forests and feasted on the furniture that the carpet salesman had stored for old Emmer Joe. And within the great house that had been taken from her, a few embers jumped from the fireplace as the landlord slept, and ignited the wooden floor. As old Emmer Joe cast spell after spell, there came a wail and a gnash of teeth within the village. Everything from the luxuries to the livelihoods of the townsfolk disappeared before their eyes as the old woman took her revenge. As the horrified townsfolk realized what was occurring, they all ran through the forest to beg old Emmer Joe for forgiveness. When they arrived at the shack, the landlord pounded at the door as her mansion burned behind him. "Please, Emmer Joe," the landlord pleaded. "I'm sorry I took your home. I've taken this too far." "I just needed a horse for my work," called Mr. Hayworth. "We just gave you a chance to see your grandson again," shouted Mr. Cook. "But we know now we should not have lied." The door to the shack flew open, and the furious gaze of Emerantine Josephine glared at them from the frail body of Emmer Joe. In a booming voice she said, "I didn't need all that gold in the first place. I'd have given it to all of you if you'd so much as made me a cup of tea. I'd have traded it all for but a meal and music and the chance to hear about someone else's day and them to ask about mine. But you have all done nothing but take and take and take from me. You cannot take love without giving it in return, especially not from a little old witch." As Emerantine Josephine finished with her words, the storm throughout the town began to dissipate, and she hunched over. A confused look returned to her eyes as the townsfolk fell back into a noise and confusion of their own. The potion should have lasted longer, of course, but old Emmer Joe had used some frightful magic that night, and quickly burned away its effects. Within moments, she had returned to her old, senile self. The only thing stolen from Emmer Joe that was not destroyed in the chaos were the many pieces of gold themselves. But as gold was so plentiful and everything else had become so sparse, traders from the town had to travel far and spend a great many pieces to even return to the modest lifestyle they had known before. The mansion had burned to the ground, and no one dared to bother old Emmer Joe in her little shack thereafter. Despite the tiny space, Emmer Joe managed to sustain herself with a small vegetable garden, one she had worked many years before, though she didn't remember it. Eventually, she even forgot the mansion that she had lived in for so long. After what seemed like many, many years, a familiar face returned to her tiny abode atop a horse. "Nana?" With the last of her teeth, old Emmer Joe looked up and saw her grandson atop the stallion. "Whatever has happened here, Nana?"
"Oh, my sweet boy, you have returned."
As she spoke and looked beyond her grandson, she saw a pretty lady behind him on the horse.
"Is that the smith's daughter, then?"
Her grandson barely registered the question.
"She is, Nana. Whatever happened to your house?" "My house? Oh dear, I'm sorry. I've been doing so much cooking lately I haven't had a chance to clean up. Can I make you some stew? You look like a skeleton, sweetheart."
Her grandson and his new wife exchanged a concerned look. The young man said, "Nana, could you excuse us for a moment?" Old Emmer Joe frowned.
"You won't leave again, will you? Not so soon?"
"What? No, no, Nana, we will not leave. We will not be far," her grandson said. "I just had a thought that we should discuss. We'll be close enough for you to watch, and we'll be back in a few minutes, I swear it." Emmer Joe gave her grandson a hesitant nod of approval, and watched as the boy and his wife walked a short distance. Their words were quiet. She could not guess at what matter they were talking over. After a short time, her grandson approached her again. "Nana, we've bought a cottage of our own a few days' journey from here."
"Oh!"
Emmer Joe struggled to show excitement at the thought of her sweet boy being so far away again. But she didn't have it in her to damper her beloved grandson's happiness.
"That's wonderful, dear."
"And we'd like to see if you want to come away with us." The little old woman's heart skipped a beat.
Oh my, but I couldn't. You have your own life, my sweet. I could never impose."
You could never impose on me, her grandson said. Everything good in my life you helped to give me. We talked it over, and we both agree we'd be happy to have you. Tears began to well in old Emmer Joe's eyes.
Are you sure? I'm an old woman now. Some day soon you may be stuck taking care of me.
Just as you've always taken care of me. Her grandson hugged her tight and led her toward his horse. You've given me such love, Nana. It's time I repaid you for it. It is an unfortunate truth that not all elders are wealthy, influential, or were once magical. It is also unfortunate that most grow tired more quickly and may have more trouble caring for themselves than those with able bodies. And it is a most unfortunate of all that too many end up forgotten or by the wayside in this fragile time of their lives. It doesn't take gold to give to an elderly one. A little time, a little care, and a little love can mean more than all the treasures in a great, big house. The end.